Ferrari went to Canada expecting to get beaten. McLaren had brought upgrades, Mercedes had brought upgrades, Ferrari brought nothing. On paper, this was the weekend they slipped backwards. What nobody expected was that their slower car with no new parts would put Lewis Hamilton on the podium and leave his own team principal admitting they had no idea they were this quick. The result ran so far ahead of expectations it has changed the whole conversation around Ferrari's season. This is how it happened. The freshest news first, because this is the part everyone is reacting to right now. Lewis Hamilton has just finished second at the Canadian Grand Prix. It is his best Grand Prix result since the day he signed for Ferrari. He started fifth, on a circuit built around long straights and heavy braking, the exact layout that punishes everything people say is wrong with his car. And he climbed his way to the front of everyone except the dominant Mercedes. He did it the hard way. On lap 62 of the race, with only 6 laps left to run, Hamilton was sitting behind Max Verstappen, a 4-time world champion, in a Red Bull that is faster in a straight line than the Ferrari chasing it. Most drivers wait. Hamilton did not. He dragged his car to the outside line into the first corner, held it where almost nobody holds it, and came out in front. Second place. Sealed with the boldest move of the afternoon. When he climbed out of the cockpit, he did not talk like a man who finished second. He talked like a man who had just been let out of a cage. And to understand why one podium means this much to a driver with more wins than almost anyone in history, you have to understand what he was buried under just a few weeks ago. His first detail at Ferrari, the thing that was supposed to make this a fairy tale, was about to read like the opposite. 12 months into the most famous transfer in modern Formula One, Lewis Hamilton was having the worst season of his career. His debut year in red was a winless one. No Grand Prix podiums across the entire campaign. He finished 6th in the championship, 86 points adrift of his own teammate, Charles Leclerc. The qualifying record was even harder to look at. Over a single lap, Hamilton was on average around a quarter of a second slower than Leclerc. For a midfield driver, that is a rounding error. For one of the greatest of all time, in the car he chose to end his career in, it was the kind of number that gets people whispering that the spark has gone for good. So here was the picture going into 2026. The most decorated driver on the grid, in the most famous car in the sport, unable to make the two of them fit together. That was the problem Ferrari had not solved, and nobody arrived at the new season certain they could. Then the sport changed underneath all of them. For 2026, Formula One tore up its rulebook and started again. The power units keep the small turbocharged engine, but throw out one of the energy recovery systems entirely, while nearly tripling the electrical power the cars deploy. The balance between engine power and electric power now sits close to 50-50. The fuel is fully sustainable. The old overtaking flap is gone, replaced by movable wings that switch between a straight line mode and a cornering mode. The cars are smaller, lighter, and narrower, with the minimum weight cut from 800 kilograms down to 768. A reset that deep does not just change lap times, it reshuffles who is good and who is not. New engine makers arrived, the grid grew, and the established order got thrown in the air. And when the dust settled, the team on top was not Ferrari, it was Mercedes. Going into Canada, Mercedes had won every single race of the season. Their young driver, Kimi Antonelli, had done something no driver in the history of the sport had ever done before him. He had taken his first 4 career wins back-to-back, one after another, with no defeat in between. That is the wall the rest of the grid had been throwing itself at all year. Ferrari, meanwhile, had built something strange and specific. The car they call the SF26 has one of the best chassis on the grid. Through the corners it can run with anyone, Mercedes included. But on the straights it loses ground, and on circuits that reward raw engine power it suffers. Montreal, with its long, flat-out runs, is exactly that kind of circuit. And here is the detail almost everyone overlooked heading into the weekend. Ferrari had already fired its biggest shot of the season. At the earlier race in Miami, they had brought 11 new parts to the car, the largest single upgrade package anyone produced that weekend. For Canada, they brought nothing, not one fresh component. That same restraint that looked like weakness on Thursday was about to look like something else entirely by Sunday night. So when McLaren arrived in Montreal with the second phase of their own upgrade package, a new front wing and reshaped bodywork, and Mercedes turned up with new front wing parts, new suspension, and a new floor, the comparison was brutal. Two of Ferrari's biggest rivals were getting faster in real time. Ferrari was standing still, on a power track, with a car already short on power. Every rational read said they should slide backwards. The weekend opened by proving the pessimists right. This was a sprint event, the compressed format that crams 2 qualifying sessions and 2 races into 3 days and gives you almost no room to recover from a single mistake. And across both qualifying sessions, Mercedes was simply on another planet. In the main qualifying session, the silver cars locked out the entire front row. George Russell took pole. Antonelli lined up alongside him in second. Hamilton qualified 5th, his best lap less than 3/10 off pole. Close enough to taste, far enough back to confirm the car's ceiling on this layout. But buried inside that 5th place was the number that actually mattered. Hamilton had outqualified Charles Leclerc, and not by a whisker. Leclerc could only manage 8th. The man who spent a full season beating Hamilton in qualifying had just been beaten, clearly, on a Saturday that counted. That was not a one-off either. In the shorter sprint race, earlier that day, Hamilton had come home 6th, while the Mercedes pair fought so hard that team boss Toto Wolff told Antonelli over the radio to stop complaining and drive. Hamilton was even investigated by the stewards twice across the weekend, once for running off track in the sprint and once for allegedly holding up another car in qualifying. Both times, no penalty. The officials looked, and the officials walked away, clean. And no, that is not a small thing. A driver, under that much pressure on a knife-edge sprint weekend, kept his nose clean while his rivals were tripping over each other. Across the garage, the other Ferrari was falling apart. Leclerc would go on to call Montreal the most difficult weekend of his career. He fought brake problems. He battled tyres that would not switch on. He never found a shred of confidence in the car. Same machine, same engineers, 2 completely opposite experiences. One Ferrari driver was drowning, the other was finally swimming. Then came Sunday, and the sky decided to make things interesting. Before I tell you how the race unraveled, do me a favor and hit subscribe. This channel breaks down the real story behind every Formula One weekend, and the 2026 season is turning into one of the strangest in years. While everyone was focused on the front row Mercedes, the weather was quietly rewriting the entire race. Light rain falls across the circuit before the start, not a storm. Just enough to soak the surface in patches and leave it drying everywhere else. That is the cruelest kind of rain, because it forces every team into a bet. The grippy slick tyre, or the grooved intermediate built for wet track. Pick wrong, and your race is over before the real racing starts. McLaren picks. They send both cars out on intermediate tyres, betting the track stays wet. The track does the exact opposite. It dries. And one of the strongest teams of the season strands itself on the wrong rubber, sliding backwards while everyone around them finds grip. The championship contender effectively deletes its own afternoon in the opening laps. Hamilton starts on a used set of slicks and nails the launch, picking off a McLaren almost immediately. But the early laps are messy. At one point, Verstappen powers past him, and Hamilton's frustration explodes over the radio in a single desperate shout that he has no power. The Ferrari weakness, broadcast live, in the driver's own voice, for the whole world to hear. If that sounds like the beginning of a bad day, keep watching, because it flips completely. Around a third of the way in, the race leader, Russell, suffers a power unit failure. The Mercedes that had dominated qualifying simply gives up, coasting to a halt. In an instant, the man who looked untouchable on Saturday is out, and his frustration boils over so far that he later gets fined for hurling part of his cockpit equipment after climbing out. The leader is gone. The race is cracked wide open. A brief slowdown across the circuit hands the field a perfect window, and Ferrari pounces, pitting both cars onto fresh medium tyres at exactly the right moment. Now Hamilton has clean air, the right tyres, and a target in his sights. The target is Verstappen. And the Ferrari that supposedly cannot survive on a power track starts hunting down a Red Bull. This is the stretch that turns a quiet recovery into a statement. Lap after lap, Hamilton eats into the gap. He is patient, where last year he was ragged. He places the car to the millimeter. He waits for the exact moment. And on lap 62, with the race almost spent, he throws it around the outside into the first corner and makes it stick. Second place, the move the entire weekend had been bending toward. Behind him, the recoveries pile up. Leclerc claws his way back from that nightmare of a weekend to finish fourth, dragging real points out of a car he never trusted. Verstappen holds third, which hands Red Bull their first podium of the entire season, a marker that they are finally clawing back into the picture. But every camera, every replay, every headline points at the Ferrari in second. And then Hamilton speaks, and you realize this was never really about a single result. He calls it the happiest day he has had at Ferrari so far. He says the team moved mountains for him. He talks about finally having the engineering group he had been working toward all this time. After a year of frustration that he wore on his face every weekend, the relief pouring out of him is impossible to miss. That phrase, the engineering group, is the master key to this whole turnaround, because the biggest change at Ferrari this season was not bolted to the car, it was the people standing around the driver. Hamilton parted ways with his race engineer from last season and went into Canada with a new voice guiding him through every lap. He even rebuilt how he prepares, stepping away from the team's simulator because he believes he performs better without leaning on it. Small human decisions stacked one on top of another that finally let a great driver feel like he belonged in the seat. There is the deeper truth underneath all of this. The car did not magically transform overnight. Ferrari did not suddenly out-engineer the entire grid in Montreal. What changed was the bond between a driver and his machine and the trust between a driver and his crew. Hamilton helped shape this year's car from the very beginning, unlike the one he was handed and never gelled with last season. And in Canada, for the first time, every piece of it clicked at once. His team principal, Vasseur, said it without any spin afterward. In the team's own words, they were expecting a difficult weekend in Montreal because several of their competitors brought upgrades, while they did not, so the result was definitely encouraging. Sit with that for a second. The boss of the team is telling you they expected to lose ground. They braced for a bad weekend, and instead, their slower car, carrying no new parts, finished second on the road. That is what makes this land so hard. It is not just a strong Sunday. It is a result that arrived against every expectation. On the wrong track, in the wrong conditions. From the driver the paddock had quietly started to write off. So where does it leave the season? After Canada, Hamilton sits fourth in the championship on 72 points, just 3 behind Leclerc on 75. The gap that was 86 points across an entire year has been crushed down to almost nothing. For the first time in his Ferrari career, Hamilton is level with the teammate who used to define the comparison. Ferrari holds second in the constructors' standings, well clear of a McLaren team still nursing the wounds of its Canada gamble. Out front, Antonelli keeps marching, his title lead now stretched to 43 points. But the most interesting part of this story is the one still unfolding off the track. There is a fight brewing over the engines themselves. Through the season, rivals have suspected one manufacturer of running a clever trick, designing parts that pass the rulebook when checked cold, but quietly find extra power once they heat up under racing conditions. Estimates of the gain range from a handful of horsepower to as much as 0.3 of a second per lap, while the team accused of it waves the whole thing away as a fuss over nothing. The governing body has now stepped in. From the 1st of June, just after Canada and right before the next race, engines will be checked for that loophole in both hot and cold conditions, with a fuller version of the rule arriving the following season. In a year this tightly packed, even a small shift in engine power could rearrange the entire order. And that is the backdrop heading into one of the most important weekends of Hamilton's season. Because the next race is Monaco. Monaco is the place that will tell us whether Canada was a genuine turning point or a one-weekend miracle. It is the opposite kind of circuit. There are almost no long straights, no places where raw engine power decides anything. It is all corners, precision, and confidence, the exact strengths Ferrari's chassis is built around, and the exact things Hamilton said he finally felt in Montreal. If the Canada form was real, Monaco is where it should bloom, not fade. But there is a warning folded into that hope. Monaco is also where the new engine checks come into force. If the manufacturer everyone has been pointing at loses even a sliver of its advantage, the pecking order Hamilton just fought through could look completely different by the time the cars line up in the Principality. The same fortnight that should reward Ferrari could also reshuffle everything around them. So Hamilton arrives at the most glamorous race on the calendar, carrying momentum for the first time all year, on a track that suits his car, with a teammate who is suddenly within touching distance, and a championship that just got a little more unpredictable. Everything is finally pointing his way. He just has to prove that Montreal was the beginning of something, and not the high point. The real question is not whether Lewis Hamilton can still drive. Canada answered that loudly on the track that should have silenced him. The real question is whether one drying afternoon in Montreal was the moment his Ferrari story finally turned, or the best day of a chapter that still ends in disappointment. We find out in Monaco. And after a year of waiting, Hamilton finally has the car, the team, and the form to give us a very different answer.